Emily was an inquisitive child, always noticing the little details that others tended to overlook. At just 12 years old, she was at that age where curiosity mingled with a child's sense of adventure, making her an expert in uncovering hidden treasures around the house. That's why, when she found an old, worn envelope tucked away in her father's dresser, she couldn't resist taking a closer look. The envelope was addressed to Jack Walker, her father's name, and bore the faint, faded handwriting of someone named Amelia. Emily had never heard of anyone called Amelia in her dad's stories, nor had she seen the name in any of their family photos. The letter itself was brittle, and she handled it carefully, feeling an odd sense of reverence for the unknown words inside. She took the letter downstairs, where her mother, Lauren, was preparing dinner. "Hey, Mom," Emily said, waving the letter. "Who's Amelia?" Lauren looked up, her cheerful expression dimming ever so slightly. She put down the knife she was using and stared at the envelope in Emily's hand, her face shifting from curiosity to something like alarm. Emily noticed the change instantly. Her mother rarely looked unsettled. "Where did you find that?" Lauren asked, her voice unusually quiet. "In Dad's dresser," Emily replied, glancing at her mother's face, trying to gauge her reaction. "Who is she?" "I've never heard of her before." Lauren's mouth opened, but no words came out for a moment. She seemed to be thinking, weighing something in her mind before she responded. Finally, she said, "Amelia, she's someone from your dad's past." Emily's interest was immediately piqued. Her dad had always seemed like an open book, sharing silly stories from his youth or funny things he had done growing up. Yet here was a whole mystery, right in her hands. The idea that her father could have hidden parts of his life from them was both thrilling and unsettling to her. "So, why haven't I heard about her before?" Emily pressed, keeping her voice casual, though she could feel the weight of her mother's growing unease. Lauren hesitated, glancing away before meeting her daughter's eyes again. "Some parts of the past are hard to talk about, Em. People change, and sometimes they leave things behind, not because they want to hide them, but because they don't know how to bring them up." Emily nodded, trying to make sense of her mother's words. It was an unsatisfying answer, one that only deepened her curiosity. She could tell that there was something more, something her mother wasn't saying. As her mother turned back to the kitchen counter, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of a secret, a big one. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, the mystery of Amelia swirled in her mind. Who was this woman, and why did her father keep her hidden from them? Was she a friend? A lost love? The idea was so strange to Emily, who couldn't imagine her father with a life that didn't involve her or her mother. She rolled over, her mind churning with possibilities and questions. From that night on, a spark had been ignited in Emily's mind. She would find out who Amelia was, no matter what it took. The next morning, Emily's curiosity only grew. The mystery of Amelia hung over her like an unsolved riddle, pulling her thoughts in even when she tried to focus on her usual morning routine. She looked across the breakfast table at her father, Jack, with new eyes, noticing details she'd never paid attention to before, the slight lines on his face, the distant look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. She wondered if he was thinking about Amelia. Jack seemed like any other dad to her, dependable, gentle, and always ready with a joke to lighten the mood. But now, a part of her felt that maybe she'd only known part of him, and a piece of his past was waiting to be uncovered. When he caught her staring, Jack raised an eyebrow and grinned. "What? Do I have something on my face?" he teased, pretending to wipe his cheek with the back of his hand. Emily shook her head, laughing a little to mask her growing intrigue. "No, nothing," she replied, then added, "You just look different today." Jack looked amused but didn't press further. Lauren, however, shot her a wary glance, as if silently warning her to leave the topic alone. But Emily's mind was too full of questions to let the matter rest. As she headed off to school, she promised herself that she would uncover whatever secrets lay hidden in her father's past. When she returned home that afternoon, the house was unusually quiet. Her mother was out running errands, and her dad had gone to a late shift. Emily saw this as the perfect chance to start her investigation. She went to her father's room, her heart pounding as she approached his dresser. The drawer where she'd found the letter yesterday was still slightly ajar. Carefully, she opened it fully, looking for any other clues that might point her in the direction of Amelia. After sifting through a few old trinkets and a collection of postcards, her fingers brushed against something smooth and cold at the back of the drawer. She pulled out a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn and edges frayed. She hesitated, a pang of guilt stopping her momentarily. She knew she was invading her father's privacy, but the questions pressing on her heart were too loud to ignore. Emily opened the journal cautiously, skimming through the handwritten pages. Most of it was in her father's familiar scrawl, brief notes and dates from years before she was born. Then, her eyes fell on a particular entry. It was dated almost 20 years ago, long before he'd met her mother. "Amelia's gone. I never thought this day would come. I can't believe it happened so suddenly. I don't even know how to tell anyone, or if I even should." Emily's heart raced as she read the words. The sadness in them was unmistakable, almost as if she could feel her father's grief through the faded ink. She turned a few more pages and found several similar entries, each laced with sorrow, guilt, and a sense of longing. Amelia had meant something significant to her father, something deep. The journal didn't give her many answers, but it did confirm one thing: Amelia's absence had left a painful mark on him. Lost in thought, Emily sat there for a long time, holding the journal in her hands. She wondered why her dad had chosen to keep all of this hidden from her and her mother. What had happened between him and Amelia that made it too painful to share? And what about the mention of a daughter? As she pondered the implications, she heard her mother's car pull into the driveway. Hastily, Emily returned the journal to its place, closed the drawer, and darted out of the room. She didn't want her mom to know she'd been snooping. Not yet, anyway. Over dinner, she couldn't bring herself to meet her father's eyes. Her mind was buzzing with the weight of what she'd read. She felt a strange, new connection to him, like she understood a piece of his heart that he'd kept locked away. Yet, she also felt a growing sense of unease. What other secrets could he be hiding? That night, as she lay in bed, the unanswered questions loomed larger. She needed to know who Amelia was, and what exactly had happened all those years ago. The following days were a blur of half-formed questions and secret glances. Emily felt like an amateur detective, piecing together scraps of information and hints from old memories of her dad's expressions or things he'd once said in passing. The mystery of Amelia had dug itself into her mind, refusing to let go. At school, she found herself distracted, doodling question marks and the name Amelia in the margins of her notebook. She even asked her best friend, Hannah, if she'd ever wondered about her own parents' pasts, though she kept her own suspicions to herself. Hannah just shrugged. "Not really. I mean, my parents are kind of boring," she said, laughing. "They've always just been, well, my parents." "Why?" "Oh, no reason," Emily said quickly, her voice light but her mind far away. She was already plotting her next steps, feeling more determined than ever to understand this side of her father that had been hidden. That evening, she waited until her dad left for his night shift before tiptoeing back to the dresser. She had returned the journal exactly as she'd found it, but tonight, she wanted to dig a little deeper. Her fingers skimmed over the items, hoping to find something, anything, that would give her a clearer picture of this hidden life her father had left behind. Behind an old stack of receipts, she found a box. It was small and unassuming, with a thin layer of dust on its lid. She lifted it carefully and took it back to her room, locking the door before opening it. Inside, she found photographs, aged and faded, of her dad as a much younger man. His hair was longer, his face more carefree, and he was laughing in most of the pictures. But what caught her attention was the woman beside him, Amelia, she assumed. She was beautiful, with a warm smile and bright eyes that radiated happiness. Emily studied the picture, captivated by the way her dad looked at Amelia with such affection. As she dug further, she uncovered more photos, including one that showed Amelia holding a small baby. Emily felt a strange tightness in her chest as she examined the picture. She wondered if that baby could be the daughter mentioned in the journal, the one her dad had lost touch with. The questions swirled in her mind, each one tangling with the other until she felt overwhelmed. There was a whole life in these pictures, a chapter in her father's past that he had never shared with her or her mom. Why had he kept this from them? What had happened that made him bury these memories so deeply? In the bottom of the box, she found a newspaper clipping. It was old and yellowed, and the headline caught her attention immediately: "Local woman passes away suddenly, leaves behind infant daughter." Her hands shook as she read the article, which confirmed that Amelia had indeed died unexpectedly, leaving behind a baby girl. The name of the daughter wasn't mentioned, but the piece described how relatives had been searching for guardianship. Emily's mind raced. Her dad had been a young father who lost Amelia and his child in one tragic sweep, leaving him with a past too painful to revisit. She felt a pang of empathy for him, imagining the sorrow and helplessness he must have felt, especially knowing that his own child had been taken in by strangers. Her head was spinning as she put the photos and newspaper clipping back in the box and returned it to its place in the dresser. She tried to make everything look untouched, hoping her father wouldn't notice her late-night investigations. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling and struggling with what she had discovered. For the first time, she wondered if she should tell her mother about what she'd found. It felt wrong to keep it to herself, yet at the same time, she didn't want to hurt her dad by forcing him to relive that pain. Still, there was one thing she knew she had to do. She had to find a way to learn more about that baby, to see if there was any trace of her father's lost daughter. In the days that followed, she combed through online records whenever she could. She searched for mentions of Amelia's name, looked for possible leads on adoption agencies, and even checked social media for anyone who might match the description of her father's long-lost child. The search was overwhelming, but her curiosity and determination fueled her. With every late-night session and each little piece of information she uncovered, Emily felt more and more connected to the father she thought she knew. The secret, once a simple curiosity, was quickly becoming a part of her life, pulling her deeper into a story that was more complex and bittersweet than she'd ever imagined. As the days passed, Emily's secret investigation began to take its toll on her. She couldn't sleep well, her mind always racing, and at school, she felt distracted and distant. Her grades were slipping, and her mother, Lauren, started to notice. Concerned, Lauren gently asked if anything was bothering her, but Emily would only shake her head and say she was fine. Still, the strain was beginning to show. One evening, after dinner, Lauren noticed Emily lingering around the kitchen, fidgeting and glancing nervously in her direction. "Is everything okay, sweetie?" she asked, her voice soft and concerned. Emily hesitated, biting her lip. She'd been debating this for days. Part of her wanted to share what she'd discovered, but she was also afraid of hurting her dad, and she didn't know how her mother would react. "Mom," Emily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to ask you something, about Dad." Lauren raised an eyebrow, a shadow of apprehension passing over her face. She put down the dish she was drying and turned to face her daughter, giving her full attention. "Of course, Em. What's on your mind?" Emily took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I found some things in Dad's room. Letters, photos, and a newspaper clipping," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "They were about someone named Amelia. And a baby." Lauren's face froze, her expression shifting from mild concern to shock. She looked down, seemingly lost in thought, as if trying to process what Emily had just said. Emily could see the emotions flickering across her mother's face: confusion, sadness, and something that looked like fear. "You found these things?" Lauren finally asked, her voice tight. Emily nodded. "Yes. I wasn't trying to snoop, but I don't know. It just happened. I found this letter, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had to know who Amelia was. And, Mom, I think Dad has another daughter." Lauren's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in shock. She looked away, trying to keep her composure, but Emily could see her hands trembling. She was silent for a long moment, lost in thought. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Amelia," Lauren said slowly, as if the name itself brought up memories long buried. "Your father mentioned her once, a long time ago, before you were born. He told me he had loved someone deeply before we met, but he didn't go into details. I had no idea there was a child involved." Emily watched her mother carefully, her heart pounding. She had been prepared for a lot of reactions, but this silence, this weight of unspoken words, was more unsettling than anything she'd imagined. "Mom," Emily said softly, "why didn't he tell us?" Lauren sighed, shaking her head as if the answer was beyond her grasp. Maybe he thought it would hurt us. Or maybe he didn't want to relive the pain. Sometimes the people we love carry burdens they think they have to protect us from. But I never thought." Her voice trailed off, and Emily could see a glimmer of sadness in her mother's eyes. "Do you think he'll ever tell us?" Emily asked, her voice filled with both curiosity and hesitation. Lauren took a deep breath, then nodded slowly. "I think we have to ask him, Em. I don't know what he'll say, but he deserves a chance to tell his story. And we deserve to hear it." Emily felt a wave of relief and fear at the same time. Part of her had hoped her mother would insist they leave it alone, but now that Lauren was supporting her, the reality of what they were about to do sank in. They were about to open a door that had remained locked in her father's heart for years. That night, they waited for Jack to come home. Emily's heart pounded with anticipation, while Lauren's face held a calm, determined expression, though her hands were folded tightly in her lap. When Jack finally walked through the door, they both stood there, waiting for him, an unusual tension hanging in the air. He stopped in his tracks, his gaze shifting between his wife and daughter. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of concern. Lauren looked at Emily, giving her a gentle nod, and then turned back to Jack. "We need to talk," she said, her tone soft but resolute. Jack's face went blank, his usual warm smile fading as he sensed the gravity of the moment. "All right," he replied, setting his things aside and sitting down across from them, bracing himself for what was to come. Emily and Lauren exchanged a glance, each drawing strength from the other before Emily finally spoke. "Dad," she began, her voice soft but steady, "we know about Amelia." Jack's face went pale at the mention of Amelia's name. For a long moment, he sat silently, his eyes moving between Emily and Lauren, trying to gauge how much they knew. The warm, familiar look in his eyes had been replaced by something distant, something Emily couldn't quite read. She held her breath, waiting, giving him the space he needed to find his words. Jack exhaled, his shoulders slumping, as if the weight of years of silence was pressing down on him all at once. I never meant for you to find out like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe it's time you both know the truth." He looked down at his hands, fidgeting with his wedding ring, gathering his thoughts. After a few moments, he lifted his gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and something that looked almost like relief. She was my first love. We met when we were young, just out of college. She was incredible. Kind, compassionate, and she made me feel like I was the luckiest man alive." He paused, his voice thick with emotion, and Lauren reached across the table, placing a hand on his, giving him the strength to continue. Emily felt her throat tighten as she watched her father grapple with memories he had kept hidden for so long. "We had a daughter together," he continued, his voice breaking. "Her name was Lila. She was just a baby when it all happened." He swallowed, struggling to keep his composure. "Amelia, she passed away unexpectedly. It was so sudden. One moment, we were a family, and the next, everything was gone." Emily felt a surge of emotion as the pieces fell into place. The baby in the photos, the newspaper clipping, it was all true. Her father had another daughter, a sister she had never known. She could see the pain in his eyes, the raw hurt that time hadn't healed. Jack took a deep, shaky breath and continued. "After Amelia passed, her family fought for custody of Lila. I was young and the grief made it hard for me to fight back. Her relatives were well connected, and they believed they could provide a better life for her. They took Lila, and I was left with nothing but memories. I tried to keep track of her, but over the years, it became harder. Eventually, I lost touch completely. Lauren squeezed his hand, her own eyes filling with tears. "Jack," she murmured, her voice filled with compassion, "I had no idea you went through all of this." He nodded, looking at her with gratitude and pain. "I couldn't bring myself to tell you. When we met, Lauren, I was afraid that this part of my life would haunt us. I thought it would be better if I just let it go. I wanted to start fresh, to build a new life with you and, later, with Emily." Jack turned to his daughter, his face filled with a mixture of shame and love. "Emily, I'm sorry. I didn't want to keep this from you. But Lila, she was a part of my life that was ripped away, and the pain of it never really left me." Emily's heart ached as she looked at her father, a man she had always seen as strong and dependable. Now, he looked vulnerable, a man burdened by a loss he'd never truly been able to share. She reached out and placed her hand over his, a gesture of understanding and forgiveness. "I'm glad you told us, Dad," she said softly. "I can't imagine what it must have been like for you, but you don't have to carry this alone anymore." The words seemed to lift the weight off his shoulders. Jack let out a shuddering breath, blinking back tears. "Thank you, Em. You have no idea what it means to hear that." Lauren leaned into him, wrapping her arms around him in a quiet embrace. "We're here for you, Jack," she whispered. "No more secrets. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." They sat in silence for a while, the air filled with a new sense of understanding and closeness. Emily felt an overwhelming mix of emotions: sadness for the loss her father had endured, anger at the injustice of it, and a fierce determination to help him find some sense of peace. Finally, she spoke, her voice resolute. "Dad, do you want to find her? Lila, I mean. If she's out there, would you want to reconnect with her?" Jack looked at his daughter, his expression filled with both hope and fear. "I've thought about it every day since I lost her," he admitted. "But I was always afraid of what I might find. Maybe she's moved on, maybe she doesn't even know I exist. But if there's a chance, if there's any way to find her..." Lauren placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll help you, Jack," she said firmly. "No matter what it takes." Emily nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "We'll start looking, Dad. We'll find Lila." Jack looked at his wife and daughter, his heart full of gratitude and something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be reunited with the daughter he had lost so many years ago. As they sat together, holding hands and sharing silent promises, a new journey began. In the days that followed, the air in the Walker home was thick with a new sense of purpose and connection. Emily felt closer to her father than ever before, her heart filled with compassion for the man who had, unknowingly, carried the weight of a past life and a lost child. Lauren, too, found herself glancing at Jack with newfound empathy, her love for him deepened by the vulnerability he had finally shared. Yet, despite their shared resolve to find Lila, an unspoken tension lingered. The revelation had changed things in ways they couldn't ignore. Jack was gentler, more contemplative, often staring off into space, as if replaying old memories in his mind. Lauren would sometimes catch him looking at family photos, his gaze bittersweet, his eyes heavy with a longing that she could finally understand. One evening, as they sat in the living room, the quiet was broken by Jack's voice. "It's strange," he said, his tone thoughtful, "how I've spent so many years convincing myself that this part of my life was over, that I could just bury it and move on. But now, with the possibility of finding her, it's like everything's come rushing back." Lauren reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. "Jack, no one expects you to let go of something like this. We all have parts of our past that shape us, and sometimes they don't make sense until we confront them. You don't have to pretend it doesn't matter." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Lauren. I know this can't be easy for you either. Finding Lila, it might open up a lot of old wounds, not just for me, but for everyone involved." Lauren gave him a reassuring smile, her fingers entwining with his. "We're in this together. No matter what we find, we're family. That's what matters." Emily listened quietly, her heart swelling with love for her parents. She admired the strength they shared, the quiet resilience they had built over years together. But she also knew that they needed more than just emotional support, they needed a plan. "Dad," Emily began cautiously, "I've been doing some research, trying to see if there's any way to find adoption records or reach out to people who might know where Lila is. It's a long shot, but I think we should start looking in the places closest to where Amelia's family lived." Jack's eyes softened as he looked at his daughter, his pride evident. "You're right, Em. I appreciate how much you're willing to help with this. I didn't want to put this burden on you." Emily shook her head, her determination clear. "This isn't a burden, Dad. It's part of who we are. Lila's my sister. I want to find her as much as you do." Jack felt his heart swell with gratitude, a glimmer of hope sparking in the depths of his sorrow. For so many years, he had carried the pain of losing Lila alone, fearing that sharing it would somehow lessen the love he had for Lauren and Emily. But now, with their unwavering support, he felt lighter, as if the decades of grief were slowly being replaced by a cautious optimism. That weekend, they gathered around the dining table, stacks of notes, maps, and old documents spread out before them. They went through everything Emily had been able to find, public records, old addresses, and a few faded contacts from Amelia's family that might still be reachable. It was a tedious process, but they worked together, each of them driven by the possibility of reuniting with the missing piece of their family. They called agencies, contacted old friends of Amelia, and followed every lead they could find. Jack spoke with people he hadn't heard from in years, explaining his story with honesty he hadn't allowed himself before. Some were sympathetic, others offered apologies, having lost track of Lila's whereabouts long ago. It was difficult, often discouraging, but Jack found comfort in knowing that he wasn't alone in his search. One evening, as they were wrapping up their work for the night, Emily looked at her father and noticed a glimmer of something in his eyes, hope mixed with fear. She could see the weight of every call that ended in a dead end, the strain of each conversation that reminded him of the painful years he had spent without Lila. "Dad," she said softly, "I know this isn't easy. But we're making progress. It might take time, but we're closer now than we were before." Jack nodded, smiling faintly. "You're right, Em. I can't help but wonder what she's like now. If she even remembers me, or if she knows anything about me at all." Lauren placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "If she's anything like you, Jack, she's strong and kind. And she'll want to know you. She'll understand why you did what you did." The words offered a sense of peace to Jack. For the first time in years, he felt a quiet acceptance settle within him, a realization that, no matter the outcome, he wasn't alone in his journey. He had a family that loved him, a wife and daughter who stood by him even as he revisited the shadows of his past. In that moment, Jack made a silent promise to himself. He would keep searching, not just for his own peace, but for Lauren, for Emily, and for the chance to finally meet the daughter he had loved and lost so many years ago. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose and the unbreakable support of his family, Jack braced himself for the journey that lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but together, they were ready to face whatever came next. As winter melted into spring, the Walker family continued their journey with renewed determination, following every lead, calling every contact, and sifting through every piece of information they could gather. While the search proved slow and often disheartening, they refused to give up, bound by the promise they had made to Jack. One evening, as Emily sat on the living room floor poring over a pile of records, she noticed an old family address linked to Amelia's relatives. It was a small town just an hour's drive away, a place her dad hadn't been to in years. Emily's eyes lit up with hope, and she looked up at her parents. "Mom, Dad, look," she said, pointing at the address. "This might be something. It's the last known address we have for Amelia's aunt. If she's still there, maybe she knows something about Lila." Jack's face softened, though a hint of fear flashed in his eyes. The idea of returning to a place that held memories of a life he had lost was both thrilling and terrifying. But as he looked at Emily's hopeful expression and felt Lauren's reassuring hand on his arm, he found the courage to face it. The next morning, they set out together. The drive was quiet, each of them lost in thought, the anticipation thick in the car. Jack's hands tightened on the wheel as they got closer to the town. It was as if the road itself carried him back to the years he had tried so hard to forget, and now, he was willingly opening himself up to it all again. They arrived in front of a modest, weathered house with a white picket fence, just as the address had indicated. The house seemed untouched by time, a small, cozy place that contrasted starkly with the storm of emotions swirling within them. Jack took a deep breath and approached the door with Lauren and Emily at his side. After a few moments, the door opened, revealing an elderly woman with soft gray curls and a gentle, curious expression. Her eyes fell on Jack, and her face softened as recognition dawned. "Jack," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if seeing a ghost from the past. "Is it really you?" Jack nodded, his voice choked with emotion. "Hello, Aunt Beth," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." Beth ushered them inside, her movements slow but welcoming. She motioned for them to sit in the small, cozy living room, her eyes never leaving Jack, as though she were trying to piece together how much he had changed over the years. Lauren and Emily introduced themselves, and Beth nodded warmly to each of them. They exchanged pleasantries at first, reminiscing on old times. Jack recounted a few memories, laughter occasionally breaking the tension, though the question lingering on everyone's minds remained unspoken. Finally, unable to hold it in any longer, Jack looked at Beth, his face earnest, and asked, "Aunt Beth, I'm here because I'm trying to find Lila. I know it's been years, and I don't even know if you know where she is, but I need to try. I need to know if she's okay, if she's happy." Beth's expression softened, and she sighed deeply, her gaze drifting to a photo on the wall. It was a picture of Amelia holding a baby, a much younger Lila, both of them smiling brightly, unaware of the heartbreak that would follow. "Lila," Beth said, her voice laced with emotion. "She was a beautiful child. So much like Amelia. After you lost custody, she went to live with Amelia's cousin, Sarah. They raised her well, Jack. Lila grew up with love and care. She had a good life." Jack's shoulders slumped with relief, but the look in his eyes showed that he wasn't satisfied. He wanted more than to know she'd had a good life, he wanted to know her, to reconnect with the daughter he had lost. "Do you know where she is now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "If I could just see her, even once." Beth hesitated, glancing at Lauren and Emily before answering. "She's all grown up now, you know. She's a young woman, living her own life. I haven't seen her in years, but I do know that she's in touch with Sarah. I could reach out, see if she'd be open to meeting you." Jack's heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. He had come so far, but the thought of finally meeting Lila brought an entirely new wave of emotions. He nodded, his voice steady. "Thank you, Aunt Beth. I would be grateful for anything you could do." They left Aunt Beth's home later that day, a new sense of hope filling their hearts. She promised to contact Sarah, to reach out carefully and let Lila know that her father wanted to reconnect if she was open to it. The drive home was filled with anticipation, each of them aware of how close they were to a reunion they hadn't dared to hope for before. Over the next week, they waited anxiously, checking their phones constantly, hoping for any word from Aunt Beth. Each day stretched on, emotions rising and falling with each passing hour, as they prepared themselves for the possibility that Lila might not want to meet them. Then, one evening, Jack's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Aunt Beth. "Jack, I spoke to Sarah. She told Lila, and she wants to meet you." Jack's heart skipped a beat, and he read the words over and over again, hardly daring to believe it. He turned to Lauren and Emily, his face lighting up with a joy and relief he hadn't felt in decades. "She wants to meet," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Lila, she wants to see us." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and Lauren reached out, pulling both of them into a tight embrace. It was a moment filled with love, hope, and the overwhelming realization that the journey that had begun with a long-buried secret was now leading them toward a reunion they had only dreamed of. Together, they prepared for the meeting, each of them carrying a mix of excitement and nerves. Jack found himself flooded with memories and questions, but most of all, he was filled with a fierce determination to show Lila how much he cared, even after all the years that had passed. As they stood at the threshold of this long-awaited reunion, they felt the past, once a source of sorrow, becoming a gift, an opportunity to rebuild, reconnect, and redefine what family truly meant. The day of the reunion came faster than any of them expected, bringing with it a whirlwind of emotions. Jack could barely sleep the night before, running through 1,000 different scenarios in his mind. He'd wondered for so many years what Lila might look like, who she'd grown up to be, and if she'd inherited any of Amelia's gentleness or his love for music and art. Now, he was finally on the brink of finding out. Lauren and Emily stood by his side, supporting him as he prepared for the meeting. They'd agreed to meet in a quiet park in the city, a place neutral enough to ease the tension of their first encounter. Jack appreciated the choice. The tranquility of nature felt fitting for the reunion that would unfold there. As they arrived at the park, they scanned the area, looking for any sign of Lila. The anticipation was almost too much to bear, and Jack's heart raced with every passing second. Emily squeezed his hand, offering a reassuring smile, and Lauren gave his shoulder a gentle pat, grounding him in their presence. Then, from across the park, he saw her. Lila stood near a bench under a sprawling oak tree, her figure framed by the soft afternoon sunlight filtering through the branches. She was tall, poised, with a familiar intensity in her gaze that reminded him of Amelia. She looked as if she was caught between wanting to move forward and holding herself back, her expression a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and maybe a hint of hope. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. There she was, the daughter he had lost, the daughter he'd dreamed of meeting for decades. His hands trembled, and for a brief moment, he wasn't sure if he'd be able to find the right words. Taking a deep breath, he walked toward her, his steps tentative. Lauren and Emily stayed a few paces behind, giving him the space to take this step alone. As he drew closer, Lila's gaze met his, and he could see the emotions swirling in her eyes, recognition, uncertainty, and something deeper, a spark of shared history she might not even understand yet. When he finally reached her, they stood in silence for a few moments, both unsure how to begin. Jack swallowed hard, then spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Lila," he said softly, the name feeling both foreign and deeply familiar on his tongue. It's so good to see you." Lila studied his face, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she nodded, her gaze softening. "I didn't know if I'd ever meet you," she replied, her voice steady but laced with vulnerability. "I mean, I always knew there was someone out there who was my father, but I never really let myself think about it too much. It felt easier that way." Jack nodded, understanding completely. "I know. I tried to let go of the past, to move on, but I could never forget you. Losing you was the hardest thing I ever went through. I always wondered if you were happy, if you were safe." Lila's eyes softened, a small smile appearing on her lips. "I had a good life. Sarah and her family, they took good care of me. But there was always this empty space, I guess. I didn't really know how to fill it." Jack's heart swelled with relief, knowing she'd been loved and cared for. He'd spent years fearing the worst, worried that she'd grown up with resentment or sorrow. Now, hearing her words, he felt a deep gratitude towards Sarah for giving Lila the life he couldn't. Lila glanced over his shoulder, noticing Lauren and Emily standing a few steps back, watching with kind smiles and patient eyes. "Are they?" she asked, a slight tremor in her voice as she looked back at Jack. Jack smiled and nodded, his gaze softening. "This is Lauren, my wife. And this," he added, turning to Emily, "is your sister, Emily." Lila's eyes widened, and she looked at Emily with a mixture of surprise and intrigue. Emily gave her a small wave, her face lighting up with a warm smile. "Hi, Lila," Emily said, her voice bright but tinged with a hint of nervousness. I've wanted to meet you for so long." For a moment, Lila looked down, as if processing the reality of suddenly having a sister, a family she'd never known existed. When she looked up, her expression had softened, her eyes filled with a cautious hope. "Hi, Emily," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, but a smile creeping onto her face. The two sisters exchanged a quiet look, a mixture of nervousness and curiosity, each one recognizing the significance of the moment. Lauren stepped forward, extending a hand to Lila. "I'm Lauren. I'm so happy to meet you, Lila. Jack has carried you in his heart for so long. We all have." Lila took her hand, a bit hesitant at first, but she relaxed under Lauren's gentle touch. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "I wasn't sure what to expect coming here, but it feels good to know that I have family." The four of them sat down on the bench under the oak tree, easing into a comfortable conversation, sharing stories, memories, and learning about each other's lives. Jack told her about his life after he lost her, his journey with Lauren, and how they had created a family that always included her in spirit. Emily shared funny stories, her bright personality putting Lila at ease, making her laugh as they started forming a connection as sisters. As the afternoon faded into evening, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of wholeness, as if a part of his heart that had been missing was finally restored. They laughed, they shared tears, and they embraced, letting go of years of separation and silently promising each other a future filled with love and understanding. As they prepared to leave, Lila looked at Jack, her gaze filled with both gratitude and anticipation. "I'd like to keep seeing you," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "If that's okay." Jack's face broke into a wide smile, his eyes filled with tears. "Of course, Lila. That's all I've ever wanted." They embraced one more time, and Jack felt the decades of pain melt away, replaced by a joy he could barely contain. Lauren and Emily joined in, holding Lila in a group embrace, welcoming her into their lives with open arms and open hearts. For Jack, the journey of reconnection had brought him full circle, showing him that family wasn't just a matter of blood, but of love, resilience, and the courage to seek healing. And as they walked back to their car, hands intertwined, he knew that the past, once a source of sorrow, had now become the greatest gift he could ever receive. The days after their reunion in the park were filled with cautious but hopeful excitement. Lila's presence was like a new light in the walkers' lives, and each family member was adjusting in their own way. Jack felt as though he'd rediscovered a part of himself that he had lost long ago, and every conversation with Lila seemed to heal a different scar in his heart. Emily was delighted by the idea of having a sister, someone she could bond with and share her life with in ways she'd only dreamed of. For Lauren, Lila's presence was a beautiful addition to the family she loved so deeply. But as they settled into this new chapter, Jack was keenly aware of the delicate nature of their reconnection. Lila had grown up in a different world, with different experiences, and while they shared a past, they didn't yet share a history together. He wanted to proceed with sensitivity, giving her the space to decide how close she wanted to be. One afternoon, Jack invited Lila over for dinner. It would be her first time seeing their home, and he was both nervous and excited to show her the place he had built with Lauren and Emily, a place he had dreamed of sharing with her since the day she was born. When Lila arrived, Jack met her at the door with a warm smile. "Come in, Lila. Make yourself at home," he said, ushering her inside. The house was cozy, filled with family photos, books, and small keepsakes from years of memories. Lila took it all in with quiet curiosity, her gaze lingering on a photo of Jack and Emily when she was a baby. She smiled, touched by the warmth in the home and feeling, for the first time, a true sense of belonging. Dinner was a joyful affair. They shared stories and laughs, each one learning a little more about each other. Emily was thrilled to tell Lila about her hobbies, her school friends, and the little quirks that made their family unique. She was eager to include her sister in every detail, treating her as if she had been there all along. At one point, as they ate dessert, Emily excused herself and returned with a small photo album. "I thought you might like to see some of our family photos," she said, handing it to Lila. Lila opened the album, her eyes lighting up as she flipped through pages filled with memories, birthdays, vacations, and countless candid moments of laughter and love. Jack noticed her eyes soften as she lingered on each photo, her fingers tracing over the images as though they were precious relics of the family she'd been separated from. "These are beautiful," Lila whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and nostalgia. She looked at Jack, her gaze filled with a quiet wonder. "I missed so much, but I feel like I'm part of it now. Thank you for welcoming me into this." Jack reached out, taking her hand. "Lila, you've always been part of this family. Even when we couldn't see you, you were always in my heart. I don't want you to feel like you have to catch up or prove anything to us. We're just so grateful to have you here." Lauren and Emily nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting the warmth and sincerity of Jack's words. Lila's eyes shimmered with tears, and she squeezed Jack's hand, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they were rebuilding. As the evening wound down, they gathered in the living room, sharing quiet conversations and watching the sunset through the window. It was a simple moment, but for Jack, it was one he had dreamed of for years. Sitting with his 2 daughters beside him, his wife's hand resting in his, he felt a peace he had never known. The past no longer felt like a weight he had to carry alone, it was now a part of the family's story, something they shared together. Before Lila left that night, Jack walked her to the door, pausing for a moment as they stood together on the porch. "Thank you for tonight," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I wasn't sure how this would go, but I feel so lucky to have met all of you." Jack smiled, his voice soft. "We're the lucky ones, Lila. Having you in our lives, it's a gift I never thought I'd get again." They embraced, a quiet, heartfelt hug that spoke of the years they had lost and the years they now had the chance to share. As they pulled apart, Lila gave him a warm smile and walked to her car, her heart lighter than it had been in years. After she left, Jack returned to the living room, where Lauren and Emily were tidying up. He sank into a chair, a look of contentment on his face. "That went well," Lauren said, sitting beside him and resting her head on his shoulder. Jack nodded, his voice full of gratitude. "It did. I feel complete." Emily sat across from them, her own face bright with happiness. "So, when's the next family dinner?" They all laughed, the sound filling the house with a joy that had been long awaited. As Jack went to bed that night, he reflected on the journey they had all been through. The reunion with Lila hadn't just filled an empty space in his heart, it had reminded him of the resilience of love and the strength of family. He knew there would be challenges ahead, years of catching up, moments of reconciling the past with the present, but he felt ready for it all. And he was no longer alone. For the first time in a long time, Jack closed his eyes with a heart at peace, filled with the knowledge that his family was whole once again. In the weeks following that memorable dinner, Lila became an integral part of the Walker family's life. They quickly fell into a rhythm, navigating the strange yet wonderful journey of building new memories together. Jack cherished every moment, each family outing, every shared joke, and all the quiet conversations that unfolded as Lila got to know her father, sister, and stepmother in a way she had never imagined. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Jack, Lauren, Emily, and Lila decided to spend the day together at a nearby lake. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine trees and the soft sound of water lapping at the shore. Jack watched his 2 daughters laughing and skipping stones across the lake, their laughter echoing against the water, and he felt a deep, quiet joy settle in his heart. As they sat together for a lakeside picnic, Jack found himself overwhelmed with gratitude. He looked at each member of his family, marveling at the way life had brought them together, despite the years that had once separated them. During a quiet moment, Lila turned to him. "Dad," she said, testing the word with a shy smile. Jack's heart fluttered, and he smiled back, his eyes softening. "Yes, Lila," he replied, savoring the title he had longed to hear from her. She hesitated, a glint of emotion in her eyes. I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for finding me, for welcoming me into your life, and for giving me all of this. I know it hasn't been easy, but I feel like I've finally found where I belong." Jack reached out, gently taking her hand. "Lila, you'll always have a place here. You're part of this family, part of me. We're so grateful to have you with us. No matter where life takes us, you'll always have us by your side." Tears glistened in Lila's eyes as she smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder, feeling a warmth and security she'd never known. Emily joined them, looping her arm through Lila's, and Lauren placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, completing the circle of love that had formed around them. As the afternoon sun began to set, they lingered by the lake, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The quiet companionship, the sense of belonging, filled each of their hearts with a contentment that only grew with each passing moment. On the drive home, Lila and Emily shared the back seat, talking about plans for the upcoming holidays. For the first time, they all felt an excited anticipation about their future together, a future filled with family traditions that now included Lila. Jack and Lauren exchanged glances, both touched by the natural bond that had formed between the sisters. Over the next few months, Lila became a constant presence at family gatherings and celebrations. She and Emily became inseparable, finding joy in each other's company and forming a deep, sisterly connection. Lauren was thrilled to see the family thrive, feeling a fullness in her heart that she hadn't realized was missing until Lila had entered their lives. Jack often found himself reflecting on how his life had transformed. The ache he had carried for so long was replaced by a sense of peace, his heart healed by the love and acceptance that now filled their family. He knew there would be challenges ahead, adjustments to be made, but he also knew that they would face them together. One quiet evening, as he sat on the porch with Lauren, he took her hand, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for supporting me, for standing by me, and for helping me find my daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Lauren squeezed his hand, smiling softly. "Jack, there's no other place I'd want to be. Lila's a part of you, and I love every part of you. Our family is complete now, and I couldn't be happier." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the night sky, their hearts full of the life they had built together. Jack knew that life had given him a second chance, and he had embraced it fully, finding not only his daughter but a renewed purpose and a love that was more resilient than he had ever dreamed. In the months and years that followed, the Walkers continued to grow together, filling their lives with new memories and shared experiences. Lila's presence brought a unique joy to the family, and every holiday, birthday, and simple evening together became a cherished celebration of the love that had brought them all together. Jack never took a single day for granted. His journey to find Lila had redefined what family meant to him, teaching him that love was both healing and enduring, and that second chances were sometimes the greatest gifts life could offer. As the years went by, Jack and Lauren watched their family blossom with pride and joy. Their daughters grew closer, each finding strength and support in the other, and their family bond deepened, weathering the ups and downs of life with a unity that only true love could create. Jack had once believed that his past was a chapter he'd closed forever, but now he knew it had simply been waiting for the right moment to open again, bringing with it a joy and peace beyond anything he had ever imagined. And as he watched his family, he knew he would carry this gift with him, grateful every day for the journey that had brought them all home.